Hi, I'm Navdeep Dhaliwal, CEO of Supreme Cannabis. We trade on the Ep.6 as Fire, and this is Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white?
Greetings, dear listener. I hope you haven't missed us too much since last time. We took what you might call a reading week at university to attend the series of events in London that comprised European Cannabis Week. So, Jonathan, tell us about Weeding Week.
Love that. Across the week, Oscar and I were attending a series of meetings with global players across the cannabis industry, all looking at Europe. Amongst those present were Supreme. We actually had the pleasure of interviewing their CEO last month.
And as the head of a company valued at $500 million, Nav really is the sort of cannabis we envisioned when we set out to begin this series. So without further ado, let's roll that clip. Hello, our guest today is Navdeep Dhaliwal. He started his career in accountancy before wending his way through the energy business, looking at solar and renewables, coming into NLX Capital, which even covered blockchain as well as those verticals, before finding himself with the Supreme Cannabis company. Now he's risen through the ranks to become their CEO, and with a $500 million market cap and a war chest of about $100 million, I think they're in a position to do great things. Welcome to the show, Nav.
Thanks for having me, Oscar. Happy to be here.
So Nav, a question we ask everybody who comes on Professionally Cannabis. What led you to the plant before your life at Supreme?
I think it's an interesting journey, and now that I look back, there's a lot of interesting steps along the way that almost feels like I was destined for it. I grew up in Vancouver, in British Columbia, in Canada. You know, that's a region of Canada that is very familiar with the plant. I had a sibling that, went through cancer, and, you can see the potential benefits from a medical standpoint. And then, now that I look back, when I was doing my final exam for accounting in my chartered accountancy, my final exam question was all about doing inventory around a plant, and having a Indian background, long history in terms of plant and plant-based medicines, natural medicines. So I think it was almost a natural progression, or almost destined for it in terms of my personal values. You see a lot of movements and, a lot of humanity moving towards a lot of plant-based diets, medicines, all these type of things. So I think we're just at the beginning of a real change in humanity and how, we look at things in terms of diets, medicine, etc.
I love the destiny point and the holistic view of plant medicine. So when you were taking that accountancy exam and talking about plant inventory, could you have envisioned at that point the way Canada was going into cannabis, or did it take you by surprise?
I would be completely fabricating it if I said I did. At that point, I was just hoping to pass. But I think in terms of Canada and cannabis, Canada has had a long-standing relationship with cannabis. Canada is quite educated around cannabis and cannabis use. Canada's attempted multiple times to legalize cannabis. For about 20 years, we had a medical access program. Canada is absolutely a global leader when it comes to cannabis use, medical access, cannabis regulation, and is really leading the way globally, in our view, when it comes to regulated cannabis.
Now, I imagine most people in this space are very much familiar with Supreme, but for those that perhaps aren't, could you give us a little overview about the organization and what your focus is in particular in 2019?
Yeah, so quickly, Supreme as a cannabis company is about 4 years old. We were licensed about 3 years ago, sales license 2 years ago, and really started with a very simple focus, and that was produce high quality cannabis at scale within a regulated environment. That's something that's never been done before. Producing cannabis at scale is very challenging. Doing it in a regulated environment is very challenging. And then also striving to produce a high quality spec for the product. So, it was a very simple focus. And as of today, we're a globally focused company with a portfolio of distinct businesses, products, and brands. So as of today, our primary business, 7 Acres, we're focused on producing premium flower at scale. We're regarded as one of the top cultivators and the leading premium brand in the Canadian industry. As I mentioned, we just announced an acquisition of a company called Blisco, which is a wellness-focused products company, and that will allow us to produce new product formats, with tincture bottles, oils, topicals, etc. And then we also have a large investment in a company called Medigrow based in the Kingdom of Lesotho. So Supreme is one of the early movers in the Canadian industry and now positioned for rapid and aggressive growth globally, leveraging a lot of the intellectual property we've established here in Canada.
Great, and I think we'll be able to come on to the international ambitions in just a moment. But let's start by focusing on 7 Acres, because I believe that's been the engine of your growth thus far. So you're a premium flower grower, but you often have supply agreements with other LPs, such as Tilray, or I know you send your extraction to Medifarm for them to produce finished products. How do you fit in that ecosystem? And will you be continuing to supply other cannabis producers, or do you see yourselves moving further down the value chain?
Yeah, so in terms of, we initially started by wanting to focus and get really good at just producing cannabis. So what we did not do is build out a patient platform where we would go solicit patients and, sell to those patients. We've always focused on being a B2B company. So early on, we focused on just producing the product, and the way we would generate revenue is we would sell that to other licensed producers, because at that point, there was only 2 ways to sell cannabis, and that was either direct to patient via mail order or to other licensed producers. And so we still have some of those legacy supply agreements, and as we ramp up our consumer packaged goods ability, our intention with 7 Acres is 100% of it goes into our packages and within our brand and is sold directly to provincial distributors. I could possibly see in the future, given our strength in cultivation, we would bring on additional cultivation, possibly for sale to others. But to summarize, we started selling wholesale. Very quickly, we'll sell everything within our own package and brand.
It's been documented pretty well that in a number of places there is a shortage of legal cannabis supply, but as I understand, Supreme has been one of the winners here as you've been able to keep production levels high. Why do you think there's such a shortage, and what are you guys doing differently to the competition?
So I think number one is the shortage should not be a surprise, and that's because demand for cannabis is enormous. In our view, the Canadian market as of today is a $10 billion market and only growing. So demand is extremely high and probably higher than most people anticipated. 2 is bringing supply online in a regulated environment takes a lot of time, is extremely capital intensive. First, you have to get licensing. Then you have to build your facility. Then you have to staff those facilities, and you have to ramp up that production. And at the same time, you're dealing with a plant, which is challenging. You're dealing with a plant in a regulated environment. So it takes a long time to get supply up and running. Again, we kept our business plan very simple. And our view was from the beginning is we knew how big this market was. So that's why from the onset, we always focused on scale. We always wanted to be a scaled producer, produce significant amounts, and we're really starting to see the benefits of that original focus because, our production and revenue is ramping quite quickly, whereas some of our peers may have started off in smaller facilities and now are changing to completely new facilities, different sites, etc. We always knew we wanted to be a large-scale producer.
So did that involve setting up facilities that were small at the beginning and then designing them so they could be built out? Or how did you plan for that scale? Or did you just buy a huge hunk of land right from the off?
So how we planned for that scale is we bought a very large greenhouse right from the onset, but the approach we took to scale was quite methodical. We first started with a 3,000 square foot room. We produced a crop in it. We made a lot of improvements, and then we built another 3,000 square foot room, and again we produced another crop and made even more improvements. And then we standardized to a 10,000 square foot room, and then we produced approximately 4 crops in that, to get an idea of the seasons, etc. And then we really standardized and learned a lot. And, once we were comfortable in terms of, this is the design, that's when we started to expand and replicate that standardized design of that 10,000 square foot room to where we are today. Is we have 23 10,000 square foot rooms licensed and under production. And, that's, providing us a lot of benefit now, because when we train our staff and architect our labor, we're working with the same exact rooms. They're pretty much all the same. They all operate the same. So it's really, standardizing design from there, scaling up. So, we're replicating the same thing versus, trying to figure out as we go.
That makes sense. And I assume you must divest some risk then by having lots of separate rooms should there be, I don't know, any infestations or failed harvests. But I wonder, with this modular design, how does that merge with your acquisitions? So someone like Blisco, is your long-term strategy to take that modular room design and bring it to their CBD and wellness focus? Or do you take some of their learnings and methodologies into your combined business?
Yeah, so I think the modular design absolutely provides a lot of advantages in terms of reducing risk and standardization. But I think a better way to put it is, we've always been focused on building a significant amount of IP. So that's in terms of the design of the building, but also how we manage and operate it. And it's the management systems, it's the software we use. We absolutely plan to leverage that going forward to bring on more cultivation, etc., using that IP. But more in terms of Blisco, Blisco, the intention there and the business plan there is to focus on non-flower products. So we would use our existing IP more to procure and produce the input into those products. But in terms of Blisco, we believe in the power of focus and distinction. Blisco will focus entirely on producing non-flower products.
So can you talk us through what those products are? And I've also got a hunch that some of them could be headed towards Europe. Can you confirm or deny that?
So number one is, the products we plan to produce. Initially, it will be full spectrum CBD oils in tincture bottles. You will likely see us get into topicals, gel caps, etc. Products that this new wellness consumer is really looking for. In terms of the ambitions for that brand and that business, it is absolutely global. So, without saying too much, I think it's quite likely that you'll see that brand outside of Canada and probably on the other side of the pond in Europe.
And so why Blisco for you guys? So I know a lot of firms similar to yours have very much been dipping into the CBD wellness space. A $48 million acquisition is no small feat. Sort of what was the process that led you to Blisco?
Yeah, so we were already an existing approximately 10% shareholder. So we were very familiar with the business. I was on the board there as well. Close relationship with that team. Damien Kettlewell, who's the founder and CEO. So, we knew each other quite well. It was just a natural evolution of our relationship. And, we believe all these businesses are built on, people and good people. So, our teams have very similar vision, mission, and values. So we believed it was in all of our best interests and, collectively for all our shareholders. And so it was really about, accelerating our growth and, leveraging our collective strengths as a team and going from there. So at the moment, I would say both, and going forward, I would say both.
Interesting. So I think this leads us on to what we mentioned earlier with Medigrow, because that's another strategic investment of yours in the CBD space. So could you foresee a similar pattern whereby you have a strategic investment in Medigrow, you grow with them and at some point acquire them? And could you also talk to perhaps the global CBD strategy?
Yeah, so I think with any strategic investment, a combination is always a possibility. You see as you go, and if it makes sense for both shareholder basis, it's something to discuss and move forward with. In terms of a global CBD strategy, we think there's a vast amount of opportunity. There's a lot of different strategies. One is, I think you see a prevalence of hemp-derived CBD isolate products. Our view is that will be a very commoditized market. It will be a very competitive market. And it's difficult to really establish competitive advantage. We're big believers in full spectrum based CBD products, and that's where you'll see us focus, and that's where we believe we can exert our advantage and leverage our existing experience and expertise around cultivation. So our global CBD strategy is really focused on full plant products. Maybe these are oils or pills, or we'll see how the product formats evolve, but it's really based around full plant driven products.
And for those full plant products, I feel that your Cambion Plant Sciences, which for listeners is perhaps your genetics library, is the simplest way to explain it, will be providing those. Can you talk a bit about that subsidiary of the business? I know it was a new announcement.
Yeah, so we already had a small genetics business within 7 Acres. We had very strong and robust chemo bars that we use in our own production, and therefore we would provide it to other producers on a royalty basis or on a cutting fee basis. And what Cambion really evolved from is, we believe we got quite strong in terms of genetic selection. We believe genetics is going to be the foundation of proprietary products, and so it was a natural evolution to really spin that out and have it operate as a standalone business. And the focus of that business is going to be improve the economics of genetics, improve the risk profile of genetics by making them more susceptible to risk. And third is really being able to produce proprietary profiles, etc., which we can then, use as input into products. If this is producing the next great recreational strain, or this is producing the strain that has fantastic efficacy for a certain ailment, we believe that is a core expertise that a global cannabis company should have. So that's a very exciting initiative for us.
One of the things you touched upon slightly before was cultivating out of Lesotho. I know from a number of the conferences that myself and Oscar have been at recently that there's a lot of excitement around Lesotho and South Africa. Where do you see Africa's place in the rapidly expanding industry?
So I think one is, Africa has a lot of opportunity, a lot of promise, just from a cultivation perspective. I think, going forward, it will have a significant role to play in the global landscape. But, this is a very challenging business. So it's all about, the people that you invest in, the people that you work with, so that was a key aspect for us in terms of the Medigrow investment. It's just a great partnership and a great team. And I think just recently we've had some fantastic developments there. You had South Africa this week create the exclusion of CBD products for consumption. And, that's a great development for us because, we believe Medigrow is one of the most advanced near-term supplier of CBD oil products. So, we're quite excited about that development and what it means for that business.
Are they already serving the South African market?
Not at the moment. So we're producing oil, and then we're working on export initiatives at the moment. So it's absolutely a key focus for us, given that we're within the borders of the country.
And on the Africa connection, I know on your website you talk about your partnership with Dynafem, a Spanish seed bank, but I believe they have some growth operations out in Africa. Is that the source of some of your genetics? Are they your European licensing opportunity? How do you see your relationship with them?
Yeah, so that relationship was focused on Canada to begin. Dynafem is a very experienced company, great people, great passion in terms of cannabis. So many of the genetics we ended up growing, they're the original breeders of, so they provided us a lot of guidance, a lot of insight in terms of, how to get the best out of those genetics.
Recently, there's been quite a lot of noise around funded capacity, and at the back end of last year, you said in an interview that it's relevant to a point, it's a foundational metric, but once you start scaling, it becomes less relevant. Why do you think that is, and what are the most important metrics to Supreme in its current state?
Yeah, so I think a little bit of background on that. We originally decided to focus on purely cultivation and not, have our own patients. And, at that point, when we would be speaking to investment analysts, etc., the entire industry is valued on patients. So they had a challenging time of how to look at our business. So our view was, here's our business plan, here's what we produce, and we're quite confident that we will produce these numbers. And that's where that metric emerged from. What I mean by that, it's relevant to a point, is, once you start building and producing and executing, it should be really what you're actually producing and your actual revenue that you're generating, that should now take over as the metric.
The cynic in us might say you want to talk about revenues because your last couple of quarters have shown such growth. But I think it does make a lot of sense.
I think it's a more timely metric, but we've been quite happy with the growth, and we're working hard to keep that going.
And talking about the growth metrics and perhaps a more general sense of how you're perceived by the capital markets, do you feel slinging the story and getting everything aligned, how does that feel at the head of such a large business? Do you have to make sure all your decisions are coherent with a story? Do you feel under a great pressure to make sure the story aligns?
What we focus on is ensuring that we're making the right decisions based on the information in front of us for the long term. That's long term for the products we provide our consumers. It's long term in terms of the right decisions for our people, our employees. If we do a good job on both of those, that's going to pay off in terms of the right decisions for our shareholders. And then it's really just communicating that to the market. And things are changing fast, so you got to assess new information, and then you got to make changes if needed. But overall, I think the biggest challenge is, because there is so much opportunity and opportunities are only increasing, is really staying true to your vision and mission and that philosophy, and staying focused to ensure that you're creating that long-term value, because it's quite easy to pursue a lot of opportunity. It's very difficult to execute on it, given the regulatory aspect of the business. Everything takes time, and so your decisions have big impacts down the road.
Yes, and I suppose that brings me on to perhaps one of the opportunities we hadn't mentioned yet, but that's the LOI you've received in Malta from Malta Enterprise in order to build, I assume, would be an extraction facility there. That's something we've not talked about, and is that because you're not yet ready to talk about it as it's such an early stage? Or is it because you're still determining what direction you'll go with that asset?
Yeah, so I could talk about in terms of our general thesis and strategic rationale. Our view on Malta as a market is that's a market that will always be pro-import, because it would be very challenging to operate a cultivation business there. In terms of access to water, real estate, just environmental characteristics, it's not the greatest jurisdiction. So, we would have no intention of cultivating there, unless it's maybe for a small scale research type of cultivation. In terms of the opportunity there, it's really akin to how Malta is already positioned in the pharmaceutical space. It's a hub, it's a value add hub, and it's a conduit into the European market. So our view on that market would be, value add products, importing all the inputs and then distributing into the European Union.
Yes, so the chain I'm imagining, but we haven't explicitly talked about, is you use the IP from Cambium Plant Sciences to create the best genetics. That's grown on scale in Medigrow and then processed in Malta and delivered to the German market. Does that narrative make sense? Is that something that you can't say until it's signed and sealed?
In terms of that narrative, and let's put square brackets around some of those items and you can replace them with a lot of other ones, that narrative and that logic makes complete sense.
One of the things you touched upon earlier was that you've recently assembled a real killer senior management team at Supreme. Can you tell us about the type of people that you look to bring into the business, the type of people that you think are going to grow and progress the business?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have a great and strong team here at Supreme. We look for passionate people, people that are passionate about cannabis and the cannabis plant. What we believe is the significant positive impact we can make with this industry. So, we look for people that share those values and, come from very diverse backgrounds. So the plant or science, if they're focused on wellness, if they're focused on marketing and branding, everyone has to have an inherent fire for the industry and a real passion because, it's still early in the industry. It's a very challenging business and we need people that are committed, for long-term success.
And a question that's perhaps more personal to yourself. What do you think makes a really good cannabis? And do you think some of the characteristics are different from that for CEOs of any other businesses?
Yeah, I would say it's quite different because, this is a very unique opportunity for a few reasons. One is you hear a lot of comparisons to tech. There are a lot of good comparisons, but what makes cannabis very different is the risk of revenue is actually quite low, if not zero, where in tech, the risk of revenue is high. So for the most part, you can pursue opportunities and get into revenue, rather quickly, or you have good odds of getting into revenue. Two is it's a very complex industry, meaning, it starts from a plant. It's a plant that's just very under researched from a commercial perspective. So there's a lot of improvements to be made in terms of the commercial aspects of this plant, for commercial agriculture. It's very complex in terms of just the makeup of that plant and how diverse it is with cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, etc. And then it also interacts with the endocannabinoid system, which we still know very little about. And then you're looking at commoditization aspects. It's a large crop. Supply is going to ramp up very quickly. What's that do to long-term pricing? And then you're looking at building massive infrastructure that requires a lot of capital. You're looking at product development, which is very similar to CPG and pharmaceuticals. So it's actually combining a lot of different industries. And now looking back, previously I've traded physical commodities, been in the energy industry, which is a lot of project finance. So, looking back at a diverse background, I'm starting to pick up on certain experience that has been quite beneficial. So I think going forward in this industry, it really requires the ability to stay on top of things and really assess new information, assess new opportunities, assess new markets, and see how it impacts all these aspects of the business. And then at the same time, ensuring that you stay focused on a game plan, where you have an advantage, because right now everything is exciting, every opportunity is exciting, and being early, you can do well on them, but over time, it will get competitive as every business is, and you just have to be better at certain things than other people to be a long-term sustainable business. And as Warren Buffett says, you have to create some moats.
And if we were to speak with the folks on your management team, what type of boss would they say you are?
Oh, that's a good question. Depends on the day. I'm a big believer in empowering others, allowing others to come up with their plans, make your decisions, and move forward. As every early business, you're going to make mistakes. Philosophy is make them quick, learn from them, and move forward. And in addition to that, I'm a big believer in teamwork. You can have the greatest plans in the world, but unless you're working together as a cohesive team, they're irrelevant. And then, some days I think they might say more like a child than a boss.
And there's a question I've been dying to ask that hasn't really fit into the conversation up to here. So you work with Wiz Khalifa on the Khalifa Kush enterprise. Mostly, what is that like? And two, have you smoked with him?
So the partnership with Wiz Khalifa, more so KKE Enterprises, is really about product development of premium products. Wiz is he's a big believer in terms of the positive impact cannabis can have on people's lives, and he's a believer in high quality products. So Khalifa Kush in the U.S. is regarded as one of the top quality products. And in terms of spending time with Wiz, let's just say we've shared experiences in the industry.
And let's talk a bit more about the branded side of things, because the medical side, it's kind of harder to lead with brands perhaps, but the recreational side, branding is key. One of the things that people must ask about Supreme is, how do you deal with having a brand that has a similar brand in the US that's perhaps dealing in a similar lifestyle space. How do you deal with the overall company's branding, Supreme being the same as the Supreme clothing company, and then how do you build consumer brands within your cannabis products?
Yeah, so Supreme Cannabis is really, the holding company, the corporation, the public company. That's more of a HR brand and a corporate mission, and we leverage the fire aspect as well. But what we really do is focus on the consumer brands, so 7 Acres, Blisco, and those are the brands that we really want to be at the forefront and resonate with the consumers. And again, with those brands, it's all about the product first, and then having a lot of authenticity that relates to that consumer base.
And let's talk about products a bit, because we've mentioned premium flower, but the future of cannabis in many minds is oils, concentrates, edibles, or plenty of new products. How do you see that market moving, and are there any products that excite you?
Yeah, so we're quite excited about the concentrates market in Canada, and the reason for that is because one is it's the same consumer we target with 7 Acres. These are cannabis enthusiasts that are consuming cannabis concentrates, and that's because cannabis concentrates are a higher quality product or a more discerning consumer because it's a direct purification of flower quality. So these consumers are going to these products because they're getting a more robust quality profile, more robust aromas and taste, etc. 2 is we're excited about it because you need high quality flower to produce these products, and we have an advantage there by producing some of the most high quality flower in the country. And 3rd is this is a consumer base our brand already has a relationship with, so we'll be able to leverage that presence of our 7 Acres brand already and go into this market with strength. So we plan to have a very dominant share in the Canadian cannabis concentrates market.
Well, we look forward to being able to sample those products shortly. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Nav.
Thanks, gentlemen. Great to be here.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white?
Well, that interview was just supreme, wasn't it? Sorry, I'll show myself out. But before I do, remember to like, subscribe, put 5 stars. I'm not really sure what app you're using, but there's probably a way to tell us you think we're great. So use that. Use it smartly. And join us next week where we'll be going, I guess you could call it politically cannabis, as we talk to the head of a cannabis agency in one of Europe's most exciting regulatory frameworks for medicinal cannabis. That was a bit of a mouthful, but join us next week to see the fruits of it.